Hey everyone, before we start today's video, I just want to let you know that this episode might be a little emotionally heavy. If you couldn't tell by the title, we're going to be delving into some existential questions. And while this video is intended to mostly be a thought experiment about a fictional world, it could be a little rough to listen to if you're having a hard time. BoJack Horseman is a complex character. He has a lot of good qualities, but he also has a lot of bad ones. So it's important to be emotionally honest with dissecting how his actions affect the other characters in the series. It's also important to recognize that one of the central themes of BoJack Horseman is that self-acceptance, persistence, and therapy are all key components to improving your quality of life. If you're struggling with depression, please take the time out to do some self-care. And if you need someone to talk to, call the crisis hotline number on screen. When the BoJack Horseman finale came out, lots of fans were speculating whether or not BoJack even made it to that final episode. A lot of people have theorized that he in fact OD'd in View from Halfway Down. Well, that was a hot topic with all of us at Nerdwire, and it got us thinking, what would Hollywoo have been like if BoJack hadn't even been born? Well, to thoroughly answer this question, we knew we had to enlist the help of the internet's BoJack expert, Johnny Two Cellos.
Hey, that's me, and this is me introducing myself. And now that introduction is over.
I'm Chris Carr, and today, John and I are going to be talking to you about what would have happened if BoJack Horseman wasn't ever born. Before we dive in, I want to give a shout out to all of our donors on Patreon, especially our super nerd sponsor of the day, Kevin Brown. Thanks to superstars like Kevin, we get to wildly speculate with y'all about theories and what ifs. If you want to pitch in, head on over to our Patreon and see if a donation tier works for you. And heads up guys, I did a collab with John over on his channel, so be sure you check that out after you watch this video. We talk about the top 10 most underrated episodes of BoJack. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's Jimmy Stewart this pony boy. So what if the man born broken wasn't born at all? Our scenario is simple. Beatrice and Butterscotch simply didn't conceive. And without BoJack, things would be very different. The Hollywood D would have never been stolen, for example, so no Hollywoo or Hollywoo.
Penguin Publishing probably would have gone under sooner, Elefante would have different ownership, Kelsey Janning's directing career wouldn't have hit that Secretariat speed bump, most importantly, Beyonce would never have broken her leg, and of course, BoJack wouldn't have interacted with the other core members of the cast.
Exactly. Starting at the very beginning with Butterscotch and Beatrice, we make massive changes. Since the pregnancy is what led these two to reluctantly wed in the first place, it's safe to say they wouldn't couple up and run off into the sunset. What do you think, John?
Yeah, at best, Butterscotch would just be a dumb thing Beatrice literally did in her youth. Beatrice simply lusted after Butterscotch, and once they both had their fun with zero consequences, they'd move on. You know, in this universe where Beatrice did not get pregnant.
Following this then, Beatrice would more than likely go on to marry into society as planned. She'd continue courting Corbin Creamerman, and wouldn't ruin her chances with him by projectile vomiting all over him since she wouldn't be suffering from morning sickness. Despite not sharing a passionate spark like she had with Butterscotch, she'd totally marry Corbin. After all, it's the proper thing to do for a well-to-do debutante. Their family empires would merge and they'd be a power couple. Despite this relationship, which I think would be a decent match where Beatrice felt genuine fondness towards Corbin thanks to his apparent respect and adoration of her, I do think Beatrice would still have substance abuse issues because of Cracker Jack's death. I think Beatrice would still have some demons to fight, you know? She still would have seen her mother Honey spiral out of control. She still would have had to drive her drunk mom home. And ultimately, she'd have a lobotomized parent. While she wouldn't have the contempt for Corbin that she held for Butterscotch or BoJack, Beatrice would still have an incredibly rocky relationship with her father Joseph, who pushed her to get that MRS. And while she might not be as outwardly abusive towards any children she has with Corbin, the trauma she experienced in her own childhood would still manifest in some pretty negative parenting.
Oh, for sure. Her mother tells her never love someone as much as I loved Cracker Jack. Beatrice's own mom tells her to never fully love a child. And while her actions are her own, that's an incredibly damaging thing to be taught as a child. And I think it would probably carry over into any interaction she had with children for the rest of her life. A child with Corbin would probably have led her to a more glamorous, acceptable lifestyle, complete with catching regional theater's renditions of Ibsen, but a child with Corbin would not escape Beatrice's inability to fully care for someone. I think then the question is, would that kid come out okay? If in this alternate timeline where Beatrice doesn't mother the BoJack Horseman, would she still mother someone who would end up like BoJack because of her own psychological damage? For me, I'd say she'd still be a severe parent, and possibly as cruel as she had been to BoJack.
On Butterscotch's end, he'd continue his life as a womanizer, and I'm sure he'd eventually end up getting somebody pregnant. I mean, look at his pattern. He knocks up Beatrice. He knocks up Henrietta. Did no one ever teach Butterscotch about condoms? Nobody? Perhaps he'd go on to actually become a novelist, though I don't personally feel like he had the talent to do so. He also probably wouldn't have fathered Hollyhock. I mean, if he wasn't stepping out on Beatrice, would he have hooked up with Henrietta? BoJack's sitcom family proved to make just as big of an impact on him as his biological one. He was haunted for decades by some of the choices he made regarding them. Without BoJack around, how would the cast and crew of Horsen Around been without him? Let's look at the two people BoJack was closest to on set, Herb Kazaz and Sarah Lynn. I think Herb is a truly talented, good guy. He was scouted by execs for a stand-up, and he created a show to give his best friend a platform. Without BoJack, Herb still would have had this trajectory. He just might not have written a sitcom about a horse. While Herb seemed to be attracted to BoJack obviously didn't sway Herb's sexuality. But due to the stigma of the time, I'm sure Herb still would have gone out cruising, gotten caught, and network exec Angela Diaz would hypocritically point it out as a ding against the network's family values. My hope is that Herb would have a cast that rallied behind him and called Diaz's bluff, allowing him to continue his work on the series. And whatever sitcom he had created would never have an arc where the lead was president briefly, and he never writes that god-awful book that Henry Winkler had to hide.
There could be a negative side to this, though. If Herb doesn't lose his job, does he ever take on philanthropic projects? Would he not meet President Bill Clinton? Would the star of his alternate sitcom have abandoned him as a friend, like BoJack did? Regardless of where things landed professionally for Herb, he would still be diagnosed with rectal cancer in the 2000s and die crashing into a peanut truck thanks to his severe peanut allergy.
Unless telling someone, get cancer, jerkwad, is actually how you get it. In my opinion, even if Sarah Lynn didn't work on Horsen Around, she would have ended up on another show. Her mom was a monster momager after all, and the show makes it very clear that Sarah Lynn was seen as an undeniably talented young woman. I think Herb Kazaz would have still clocked that talent and taken her on as a cast member to whatever program he was show running. Unfortunately, with or without BoJack, Sarah Lynn still would have been abused. Not only does her mother overwork her, push her, and not show her much affection, it is heavily implied throughout the series that Sarah Lynn's stepfather is incredibly inappropriate with her. From taking pictures of her to knowing exactly how bear fur tastes, the optics are not good.
I think there's a chance that Sarah Lynn would have taken a different path without BoJack. She definitely still would have been pushed to be a superstar by her parents in Hollywood in the same way, but early on in Horsen Around, BoJack instilled a dangerous mindset into Sarah Lynn, the whole don't stop dancing thing. Sarah Lynn internalized this, and I think there's a chance that if this idea had never been internalized by Sarah Lynn, she would have pursued further education and studied to become an architect when she turned 18. I think until then, it's likely her parents would have still been hyper-controlling of her career, but she may have been able to break free and pursue her dreams without BoJack's early influence.
Let's move on to Todd. I feel like Todd, being Todd, he's still gonna be couch surfing in LA, just maybe in a less glamorous setting. I feel like he'd still be the same old Todd. I still don't think his rock opera would go anywhere. I'd even argue that it took BoJack's mentoring for the opera to go anywhere in the first place. Yes, BoJack, with the help of character actress Margot Martindale, derailed the project, but Todd would need to find a similar mentor, one who didn't have extreme abandonment issues. The rock opera is one of the few areas I think BoJack honestly was needed to make a move in the right direction. And then, he BoJacked it up.
But the thing here is that for whatever reason, Todd is super endearing. People just kinda love him. I mean, look at Kelsey Jennings. He also sort of fails his way into major successes constantly. I mean, he was briefly the governor of California. He was hired to be the vice president of ad sales at a major corporation after interviewing to be their janitor. I think there's a chance he would have just ended up couch surfing in equally glamorous places, some other big star's house or something. I think at the end of the day, Todd would have been just fine.
Shifting gears to my favorite character in the show, let's look at Princess Carolyn in a world sans BoJack. I'm left wondering if her career would have accelerated further without her constant babysitting of BJ. He got in the way of a lot of lucrative deals, and agents are all about connections. You burn a bridge with a director or a brand, you're cutting off all your clients to those potential jobs, not just the one crummy client. Not only did BoJack throw her curveballs professionally, the two's on-again, off-again relationship with one another really messed with PC. She put so much time and energy into BoJack as a client and as a romantic partner, and I think it ultimately affected how she dated. Vincent Adultman, aside from being 3 kids in a trench coat, was a rebound meant to spite BoJack. And Ralph, she didn't really give her all to because she'd been burnt before. She kept her apartment after moving in with him in case they broke up. Guys, if you have a fallback plan, you're gonna fall back. Perhaps if she hadn't dated BoJack, she would have made healthier choices in her relationships and settled down sooner. And probably not with her assistant Judah. Perhaps the biggest storyline of PC's was her calling to be a mother. Now, I'm certainly not going to claim BoJack was responsible for her fertility issues. We know that she'd had many miscarriages throughout her life, so this isn't like she wasted a window of opportunity on him. I do find myself asking, though, would she have started the adoption process sooner? Princess Carolyn is absolutely a nurturer and likes taking care of others, which is maybe how she found herself in a codependent relationship with BoJack in the first place. If he wasn't in her life, I think she would have thought about kids sooner, having a more healthy, symbiotic relationship with a child of her own, not a giant man baby. Horseman baby? You know what I mean.
So I actually have a few different thoughts on Princess Carolyn. She is such a fighter, such a go-getter, so resilient, that personally, I think PC's career would have likely moved at the same pace. I don't think BoJack held her back career-wise. She went out and took what she wanted, and I think that would still happen with or without BoJack. I'm a little torn on whether or not she would settle down sooner. I definitely think she would have tried to, especially without BoJack as an obstacle, but we also saw her sabotage her relationship with Ralph in season 4, and her career has gotten in the way of many things in her personal life. She would have definitely had a better chance to settle down sooner without BoJack, but would she follow through? I'm not so sure.
Okay, I can totally see what you mean about her career drive. So, what about someone whose place in the industry seems purely accidental? Mr. Peanut Butter literally stumbled onto a set and became famous. Without BoJack Horseman, there'd be no Horsen Around. Would there still be a Mr. Peanut Butter's house? There might not be this specific show with Zoe and Zelda modeled after Horsen Around, but I'm sure there'd be some different Herb Kazaz show or sitcom being used as a model to pull from. And I 100% think PB would still end up on TV. The guy has the craziest luck and is always stumbling up. PB has been pretty unlucky in love, though, and I find that to be a Mr. problem that isn't influenced by BoJack in any way. I assume Mr. Peanut Butter still would have multiple wives and many failed relationships, with or without stardom.
I definitely agree that PB would still end up on TV. He likely would have even ended up on that studio lot the same day he got the Mr. Peanut Butter's house job. He always finds himself in incredibly opportune places. He was even able to showcase his hosting skills while working at a shoe store. If he was in LA, he would have been discovered. And yes, he definitely would have still had multiple wives, but maybe different wives?
Speaking of women married to Mr. Peanut Butter, Diane is so tied to BoJack. How do you think her life would be without him?
Diane is a really interesting character to examine in this scenario. We know she grew up watching Horsen Around as a comfort show, so she likely would have had to find a different comfort series without BoJack. Maybe whatever show Herb made instead? Let's operate under the assumption that because Mr. Peanut Butter's life is so different without the Horsen Around ripoff, he never meets or marries Diane. I think Diane likely would have still written Secretariat, her childhood would still lead her to become a writer, but after that, it's a much bigger question mark. She likely never would have met Princess Carolyn, which led to a ton of her career opportunities post One Trick Pony. She probably would have remained a successful ghostwriter, but it seems like we maybe never would have gotten Ivy Tran. I'd like to think that Diane would have found herself eventually, left LA and found happiness, because I believe in her growth as a character, but likely after going through similar trials and tribulations we see her go through in the series. Maybe a failed marriage with someone else who isn't quite right for her before she actually takes a chance and bets on her own happiness. You know, like she did when she moved to Chicago to be with Guy.
Oh, absolutely. Career-wise, yeah. I think she'd still be writing, just maybe less involved in the entertainment industry. She'd be sticking to memoirs, ghostwriting projects, maybe eventually she'd end up blogging. I mean, that's where her ex ended up. Diane could have wound up doing a stint of listicles. Her family life, for me, is definitely the bigger catalyst for feeling misunderstood, needing to be a writer, and needing to lay down roots anywhere other than Boston. Because of the negative atmosphere in her childhood home, I do still think Diane would engage in questionable, self-sabotaging choices. I don't think BoJack made her do anything. He just made her feel like her selfish choices were okay. Sure, lie to your husband. Sure, stay here and day drink. Yes, we're the only people who make sense because we're both so intensely unhappy. Let's be unhappy together. BoJack didn't create those feelings within Diane, but he did nurture them and encourage them. Without him around, I believe Diane would still have found some other person to fill that role.
So what's the verdict? Is the world better without BoJack?
Hard to qualify, but I think something we're constantly seeing with this thought exercise is that plenty of characters were on similar paths with or without BoJack.
Totally, and I'm a little surprised by that. But I suppose the lesson is that if BoJack spent more time being empathetic, he'd probably be a net positive in the lives of his friends and family.
Absolutely. And we know BoJack was capable of change and acceptance and surrender. So his very existence proves that an individual can make both positive and negative impacts on others. Wonderful Lifing him, this sort of determinism approach to would the world be totally different without them, implies that the other characters aren't responsible for their own actions. They're just reacting to what's thrown at them, steering a course based solely on external events.
Yeah, and it's clearly not super cut and dry. I mean, I feel like if we look at BoJack's character and the series as a whole, it's clear that there does have to be some give and take. You can be better than what's thrown at you, and you can make your own choices, but, things aren't always up to you. You might be pulled in a direction you didn't necessarily plan on going. You definitely can be influenced by someone. So, I don't think the world is better or worse with BoJack in it. It's just different, with people placing blame elsewhere.
Of course, this is all just wild speculation. What do you think would have happened if BoJack Horseman hadn't been born? Do you think many characters would have led similar lives? Or would they have gone a completely different path? Let us know in the comments below. A huge thank you to our buddy Johnny Two Cellos for popping in to give his 2 cents on this topic.
No, thank you for having me on to talk about my favorite depressed horse with some of my favorite people. Let's do it again soon.
Be sure you check out John's channel for his incredible analysis of BoJack and tons of other shows. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you can keep up on all the cartoon conversations with us. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. See you, Space Cowboy.